Oh, and mute your microphone on your computer.
The time is 7:42. Clerk Troutman, please take roll.
Board President Anguiano,
Present.
Trustee Martinez Lara,
Present.
Trustee Novales, Trustee Ruiz,
Present.
and I, Clerk Troutman, am present. Please let the record reflect that we have a quorum.
Thank you. Item 3.1, report from closed session. Clerk Troutman, please share.
Item 2.1, in closed session, the board received information and took action. In closed session, the Board of Education approved the stipulated expulsion of student student case 2022-23-39 for the 23-24 school year. Motion was made by myself, Clerk Troutman, seconded by President Anguiano, and carried on a 5-0 vote. In closed session, the Board of Education approved the request for readmission of student case 2022-23-20 for the 23-24 school year. Motion was made by Trustee Martinez Lara, seconded by Trustee Novales, and carried on a 5-0 vote. Item 2.2, in closed session, the board received information and was updated. Item 2.3, in closed session, the board received information and was updated. Item 2.4, in closed session, the board received information and was updated. Item 2.5, in closed session, the board received information and took action. In closed session, In closed session, the Board of Education approved the appointment of Art Paz for principal at Banning High School. Motion was made by Trustee Ruiz, seconded by President Anguiano, and carried on a 5-0 vote. Congratulations.
Good evening, President Anguiano, Clerk Troutman, distinguished board members, Superintendent Davis, community members. On behalf of the Banning Unified School District, I am honored and excited to announce Art Paz as principal of Banning High School. Mr. Paz earned his bachelor's degree in social science and his master's degree in educational administration from Cal State University at San Bernardino. Mr. Paz worked in various roles for the Riverside County Office of Education for 23 years. For 8 of those years, Mr. Paz served as a teacher. And for the rest of his time at our COE, he spent his time as principal for the alternative education and special education programs. Later, Mr. Paz worked as a coordinator for prevention and intervention services for the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools and as the assistant principal for leadership, Military Academy Charter School. Most recently, Mr. Paz is an assistant principal at our very own Nicollet Middle School. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Art Paz as the Banning High School principal. Congratulations.
Good evening, President Anguiano, Superintendent, Mr. Davis. I am humbled for this opportunity to serve as the principal at the great Banning High School. I invite you, once I get my feet wet, to come and visit, to show you the great programs and to see the kids. These are our kids in Banning, and we're going to make this a great school, and I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you and welcome. Item 3.2, opportunity for community comments. Have we received any community comments?
We did not receive any comments.
Item 3.3, BTA comments. I would like to welcome BTA President Anthony Garcia.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just, first of all, want to congratulate Mr. Paz. I wish you the best at high school, and you will be missed at Nicollet. And second, I just wanted to thank the board and the district for giving us a very competitive raise that will keep us competitive with other districts and hopefully will help with hiring next year. Thank you. Oh, also it passed with the average of about 97% the TAs and the MOUs. So everybody was very happy with it. And so thank you.
Item 3.4, CSCA comments. Okay, so we don't have a representative for CSCA. For comments, item 4, superintendent comments.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board and our community. Just a few things to share. Although graduation was only 2 weeks ago, it seems like it was forever ago. But I want to highlight some things during that time. I want to congratulate our 2023 graduates, all from adult school, independent school, New Horizon, and Banning High School. Just to see your faces and your excitement really ignites us. And that is the goal. That is the goal of our organization, of the board, of the superintendent, and everyone here, all of our staff, is to see you successful. So we congratulate you and wish you well in the future. Sticking with graduation, I really want to thank our facilities team. Tonight we have Mr. Ingrassi here, Mr. Page, and Mr. Herrera. So many others as well, including security. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But I just want to thank the team. Our facilities look great. The amount of time, effort, and energy that went into that. Thank you and your teams for that. I know that last week, Mr. Page was so excited. I don't know if Mr. Ingrassi was. I know he was there in the mix, but they cooked for the MOT staff as a sign of their appreciation. And Mr. Page said this to me. I'm sorry I'm calling you out, but he says, I wanted to show Mr. Herrera up because Herrera comes and cooks. And so you were really excited about that. But thank you for showing your gratitude to the staff. I believe they really appreciated that work. And that's what it's all about, showing gratitude for the work that we do for ourselves, each other, and our students in our community. And finally, bargaining. So Mr. Garcia talked about it. So I want to not just congratulate our teams, but there was a moment because negotiations were really tough this year. We're facing a lot of tough times with our labor market as well as our fiscal challenges that we have. And at the end of the day, we need to think about how we best support our staff, and that's not always easy. There was a time where I was working with the district team and I felt helpless. I felt helpless because I couldn't be there to help them. Almost like when you have raising children of your own and something happens and you feel their pain, you see it, but they have to work through it on their own. And you're there to support them. And so I'm just really proud of our team to come together and working through that. We still have a whole lot of work to do, but just know, Anthony, and your team, we appreciate you. And just personally, I appreciate your level-headedness and the team that you have, because I think you understand that things aren't going to be perfect, but we're trying to do the best that we can to make this place the best place that it is, and building off our strong traditions in Banning. So thank you for that. And we are currently at the table with CSCA, and we wish that same progress moving forward in connectedness. So thank you.
Item 5, consent calendar.
The recommendation is to approve consent calendar agenda items 5.2 through 5.5 as provided. All matters listed under the consent calendar agenda are considered to be routine and enacted by one motion and vote. There is no separate discussion of these items prior to the time the Board of Education considers the motion, unless a member of the board or administrative staff requests that specific items be discussed and/or removed.
Do we have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar as provided?
I move.
I second.
I have a motion from Ms. Troutman and a second from Ms. Novales. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Item 6.1, public hearing 2023-24 preliminary local control accountability plan and budget. The Board of Trustees will now conduct a public hearing on the 2023-24 preliminary local control accountability plan and budget. Now is the time and place for the hearing. The time is 7:51 PM. At this time, I invite Dr. Kazi Bush and Mr. Herrera to present on the preliminary LCAP and budget with their teams.
Good evening, President Anguiano, Clerk Troutman, distinguished members of the board, cabinet, superintendent, and the community. This evening, we are presenting some elements from our draft LCAP and budget. And as always, we like to lead with the mission of the Banning Unified School District, which of course is that the Banning Unified School District is a diverse community that collaborates to develop responsible, respectful, prepared students to achieve their full potential, to prepare, inspire, and educate. And I did want to specifically read that aloud because it does anchor us towards the goals of the Banning Unified School District, which this particular graphic here is anchored against. And this is our academic foundation, which is an acronym for ACHIEVE, because ultimately that is our purpose here in the district, is to create an environment for students to achieve. We are doing that through assessments, our common formative assessments, through our curriculum, which we provide a guaranteed curriculum to every student. The habits that we have, our beliefs that shape our practices and our mindsets to ensure that every student achieves, to provide high quality first instruction for every student that is engaging, and to have the belief that each one of us as individuals and a collective team can make that happen. Finally, the value that we place on cultivating leaders at the site level, all of the professional development we've done to ultimately create a safe learning environment for every student with optimal conditions for them to continue to learn. With that, the LCAP plan, we are at the end of a 3-year cycle for this LCAP plan. And what you will hear after me from Dr. Pendleton, she will go into detail, an overview, not too much detail as we'd be here probably until tomorrow. She'll go over some highlights, if you will, of each of the sections that address the goals that have been referenced, and also talk a little bit about how we engage community partners to collect input, and of course, to really clarify some of the programming that we're attempting to put into place to support students. And after Dr. Pendleton, Mr. Herrera will talk about the budget or the proposed budget to support the LCAP. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pendleton, who's going to start with talking about a very important component, which is two-way communication for the LCAP plan. Dr. Pendleton.
Good evening, President Anguiano, Clerk Troutman, distinguished members of the board, Superintendent Davis, and our community. So I wanted to talk about the LCAP as a two-way communication tool. It's what we use to describe the how and the why of the programs and services that we selected. And then it serves as going the other way to our constituents, our parents, our teachers, our community, to give them a voice, to really think about what the programs and the services that we've outlined, do they meet the unique needs of our community? And that's why it's really, not only does it explain what programming we have, but it serves as a communication tool because it's because it's a 3-year plan, it's constantly evolving and growing year by year. So I first wanted to share what was done this year to engage our educational partners. these are the different types of meetings that we've held throughout the year, including the number of meetings, the dates, and the number of participants who've attended the meetings on a regular. We also wanted to share that this year we conducted a student focus group of secondary students where we had approximately 20 students. We asked them a variety of questions in regards to programming, and they gave us their honest feedback on particular things that we were speaking to, the things that are happening at the high school that impact them in the classroom and on the field. So that was very, very good. We also had about 78 responses to our LCAP survey. And we met with our labor union partners to also present what you are all going to see tonight. So just before I move on to the next slide is that these are not exclusively the only educational partners that we met with. We also had focus groups such as teachers, principals, instructional coaches, the intervention teachers. They were also different types of focus groups that we met with to speak about what are the needs at their level so that we can begin to engage about what services are there, what gaps in services and actions still exist in our LCAP. So some major themes that emerged from those meetings were continue and diversify our attendance incentives, that they really wanted us to, as a community, create engaging parent workshops to draw people into our district to become, for our parents to become more involved in the educational services that we're providing here in our district. Building school connectiveness, providing students with a solid college and career readiness programs, internship, mentorships, partnerships with community organizations, academic supports that include tutoring, interventions, literacy initiatives, and supports for our special ed students to increase services, supports for service providers. And then last but not least, to increase the services for our English learners, which included bilingual aids in the classroom, after school programs to increase their exposure to English and so forth, and also parent workshops. So I just wanted to share a little graph here, a timeline of when do we start developing the LCAP? And really it starts August. It starts in August. And we start by beginning to look at what we said we were going to do and planning our actions, planning a timeline for when we're going to execute certain things. We continue to look at the survey. We continue to bring back the feedback from these focus groups. The distinct focus groups, student groups is one of them, but our parent groups, our teacher groups. And then about February, May, we start engaging with our community partners once we've developed a draft or have an outline of what we think from what the voices that we've heard about actions and services that we need to implement for the following LCAP. And then we bring into the bargaining units to DPAC, to DLAC, to the budget committee. This year, it worked the other way around with the budget committee. We heard from the budget committee some of the needs they were looking at, and we were able to capture some of that in the LCAP. Then in March and May, we start making that plan. We start drafting that plan, and we start seeing trends and input. We start adjusting some of those goals and actions, and we start creating a budget for the LCAP. The other piece that's in this budget, that's in the plan development in March that's when we circle back with, look, this is the draft. These are the intended services and actions, and providing engaging again with our educational partners to be able to provide them with the voice about what they think these actions and services meet the needs of our community. So right now, the public hearing is today. It'll come again for board action on the 28th, and then it is due to the county on June 30th. So the next slide speaks specifically to our student groups. Critical student groups in the Banning Unified School Districts are our English learners, our socially economically disadvantaged students, our foster youth. Then the students with significantly, numerically significant group would be our students with disabilities and the ethnic group specifically of our African-American students in particular. And I'll get into the next slide about where we really need to begin providing services for African-American students. I wanted to show this graph just to kind of frame what I'm going to share next. This is a demographic that is current for our district. we're about 76% Hispanic, 10% white, 8% African American, 3% Asian, 2% Native American, and about 1% Filipino. That's what we look like when it comes to demographics here in this district. And so what I also wanted to share, based on enrollment and raw numbers, is what are those subgroups look like? What percentages are they attending our schools? Because this impacts the levels of services and actions that are allocated to the schools. We have schools that have high English learners, for example, Central, 2.5, 25, almost 26% of the students who attend Central are English learners, as compared to maybe Florida Street with only 8.3. Then we have our homeless youth. We have 18% that are attending New Horizon High School. And then we look at our socially economic disadvantaged student group. They're pretty much even, they pretty much about 90.5 as an average percentage throughout our district. Next, I'd like to share our English learner proficiency rates. The green represents about 16% of the students who are scoring at a level 4 in the LPAC. A score of a level 4 is what the requirement, the first criteria and reclassification. That means that we have about 85% of our students not meeting that first requirement to be reclassified. So this is definitely an area of focus in this year's LCAP. These are our goals. And as you notice, we have one highlighted in yellow. It is the additional goal due to some legislative changes in the state of California. We were required to add a 5th goal in order to address our critical subgroups that I just reviewed, who have been pervasively underperforming for 3 years or more. So that goal is there to support our students in that critical group. So goal number 1. What I've added to this slide are just addition and update to goal number 1. Everything that existed last year in goal number 1 was the same or changed based on these 4 points. So action 5 is where we added a secondary EL specialist to support the elementary sites with designated and integrated lessons and supplemental curriculum to be able to show teachers how to implement that in their coaching sessions, be able to monitor their progress, create interventions, and create parent outreaches. And why is this important? Because we know that after 5 years, when they go to the middle school, they now become long-term English learners, and the percentages, their ability to be reclassified decrease. So we want to catch them in elementary. Another item we added is STEAM on Demand. We thought this was an item to bring hands-on learning and experimental learning to our elementary students as we prepare them for the world of science and math and art and engineering. So the kids have had just a wonderful response to this curriculum. The next slide, the next action 10 is just basically, we haven't added teachers. I just want to clarify that. There's 4 teachers that are going to be funded at a CTE. We haven't added teachers. They're just teachers who've added a credential to their credential. So we now have 4 that we've are funding out of the LCAP. And lastly, we're adding an athletic scholar program. And this is something that we are pretty excited to launch this year. This is a program where we are going to monitor the students academically and actually to ensure that we're increasing the outcomes, the academic outcomes, and the GPA of the team so that less and less kids are ineligible to play. Second goal is on professional development. And we only had a couple of updates here to this action 1 because it's kind of wordy. So we've added continual instructional impact coaching for our coaches that are at each of the sites. We've also added trainings for administrators, teachers, and paraeducators to really rely on data-driven IEPs to meet the needs of our kids who are on an IEP. And for the last bullet, the professional development opportunities, really what we did here is we actually went and audited the things that we are purchasing and actually made some decisions about not renewing some subscriptions based on usage. And so in this one, we actually eliminated some of the platforms that we saw that had probably like a 2% and 0% usage. So, and some of the things that we've also eliminated were things of professional development that we know we can support with our instructional coaches through a professional development calendar that we're currently developing. Goal 3. Here we've added, which is a new goal, based on the feedback we got back from our ELD leads at the sites, is a need for bilingual, excuse me, that's not it. The bilingual clerks, this is just a change in how we were funding them. So we just had an increase there basically. And then there was a name change for the district school safety coordinator previously, which now is the Safe and Supportive School Coordinator, just to be reflective of that name change in our LCAP. And then action 4 is that we added a alternative to suspension teacher so that we would have a teacher at each level, elementary, middle, and high school. And along with adding a teacher, we've added their support in the classroom. And then lastly on this one, we went from 14.5 FTEs for campus supervisors to 22. And there's not that there we've hired more, but it just reflects our current staffing. And last but not least, goal 4. Actually, this is not the last one. We've added, here we have in our plan, just a name change for our parent community liaison to the district outreach specialist. We just changed the name in the LCAP to reflect that position. And then goal 2, we've added the district and community relation coordinator for this year's LCAP to help us coordinate that public and media, and also help us coordinate with other agencies outside our community and within our community. And then this is our new goal. And this is our new goal that was required because of our differentiated assistance. As I shared with you earlier, this is a goal that was added because we have those particular subgroups who 3 years have been low performing. We have to demonstrate services and actions that are specific to those significant subgroups. The first one being our English learners. I've added this FTE for our ELD specialist, which was in goal 1, but it's also reflected here. I didn't write it in goal 5, but I wanted to let you know that the reason why we added it was because of the need that we saw to support our English learners. As you saw, 85% are not being reclassified. Here is where we have 4.4 FTEs for bilingual aides for the elementary and the secondary sites, which to support kids in the classroom with their language development, to be able to run groups in the elementary so that the teacher can focus on another group. We thought this was something that the ELD leads and principals and teachers really felt strongly about. We also are looking at providing after-school programs to provide designated language development. So the kids could begin to advance quicker with having an extra intervention hour with just English development, then be able to provide access to English learner parent workshops, really outlining what parents can do at home to help support their development. Providing trainings for case managers and trainings to improve goal writing, and specifically with accommodating and reclassifying procedures for students who are EL and on an IEP. And then finally, provide professional development for educators to equip them with the language acceleration tools, the academic literacy, and the disciplinary knowledge of English learners. Action 2 focuses on our homeless and foster youth. In our prior LCAP, we did have a homeless and foster youth liaison, and what we did here is outline some additional actions and services that we would like the homeless and foster liaison to focus on, which include home visits, increased butt passes, housing vouchers, food pantries, and strengthening really our partnership with our local group homes. And sometimes we feel like that's a little bit of a breakdown in communication, and we really need a designated person to kind of help us with that. And then goal 5, the other is looking at our, what do we need to do to provide extra supports for African-American students within Banning. We need to create committees, advisory committees for parents to have a voice, but also for students to be able to tell us what their needs are at a secondary level and at the elementary school, to really tell us what it is that they need and give them a voice in the process. We want to start a mentorship program, as well as providing teachers with equity practices related to discipline, as well as culturally responsive teaching training for all of our teachers. And last but not least, be able to provide teachers with extra duty pay for after-school IEP writing, collaboration with the general ed teacher and the case manager in order for us to have a seamless education in the classroom for our children with an IEP. And then continue to provide differentiated teaching strategies for our K-12 teachers. So we wanted to preview this evening what our three goals for the following year, for our new cycle, our new 3-year LCAP cycle. We wanted to make sure that we captured everything that we're doing, but condensed it. So I've provided this slide to be, so you could see that we're still looking at accelerating student achievement. We're still focused on professional development. We're still focused on providing students with a secure and nurturing educational environment while we're involving parents. We felt that those two were really connected, that we could do that collectively. And lastly, our goal to enhance the academic, behavioral, and emotional achievements of our lower performing students here in the district. Thank you. And now I'd like to call Mr. Herrera.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Pendleton. Good evening, President Anguiano, Clerk Trotman, distinguished members of the Banner Unified Board of Trustees, Superintendent Mr. Davis, Cabinet, membership of the leadership team, and the community here today and meeting us also virtually. Today, I do have the privilege to co-present with the academics team on what is now the fiscal component of the Local Control Accountability Plan, including the preliminary budget, by saying that 20 times, for the 2023-24 fiscal year. This chart here before you is a representation of the total local control funding formula. And the best way to read this is from the bottom up, starting with base funding at $45.4 million. The meat of what the LCAP with supplemental and concentration funding at $18.9 million. And also additional add-ons that were written into law that make together an additional $1 million to a total of $65.4 million. What is very interesting in some of the recent changes with the fiscal components of the LCAP is that there is carryover that needs to be tracked year over year to provide increase and improved services. The estimated actuals indicate that there will be a carryover of $1.7 million. The entitlement for 22-24 is $18.9 million. And also due to the mechanisms behind the carryover as it relates to the new base funding of the new year, there is an additional increase necessary to be covered in order to ensure that we're meeting the same 46.2% requirement of increase and improved services. That is a $309,000 additional contribution to supplemental concentration funding that needs to come from somewhere. And later on in the slides, I'll go ahead and indicate where those $300,000 came from. That brings us to a grand total of a little bit over $21 million. Again, indicating that for every $100 that is received in LCFF funding, $46.20 need to be spent on increase and improved services. That means that $53.80 can be dedicated to base expenditures such as keeping the lights on, teacher salaries, the basic functions, classified support as well. And so again, just wanted to highlight here how unique Banner Unified is in terms of the type of population in terms of unduplicated pupil counts at about 90%, and also the funding mechanisms to demonstrate to this document, the LCAP, that we have to have $21 million, which is 46.2% of our total LCFF revenues. Within the budget cycle, this is, again, the preliminary budget. There will be various changes as it leads up to the proposed budget. It does include the estimated actuals for the prior year as well. And some of the assumptions for the new fiscal year include very conservative enrollment, also average daily attendance, and the cost of living adjustments as it relates to the latest governor proposals. It does include a multiple year projection of 3 years, which would be the 23-24, 24-25, and 25-26 fiscal years. And even though during this reporting period, there is no self-certification as a positive certification, it is reasonable to say that the district is meeting its financial obligations in the current and 2 subsequent years, also known as, again, the positive certification. The budget has to be in alignment with the LCAP as it relates to supplemental and concentration funding. And some updates here from the governor's budget earlier in May is that there will be a fully funded COLA at 8.22%. That is the cost of living adjustment. Also, there is a state deficit that will be resolved by the governor's proposal in reducing one-time funding. And in the words of School Services of California, this is coined as the riskiest budget in about a decade due to some of the delayed tax receipts. As you may recall, the receipts of taxes had been delayed through October. Therefore, there is a lot of fluctuations in revenues at the state level. Also, we do see that the stock market, there's good days, there's not so many good days. Altogether, there is some promises there. And so state funding is directly linked to the main three taxes, which is personal tax, corporate tax, and also the personal, sales, and corporate tax. To the right, we have the illustration here. It is where we're at in this point in time. Currently, we're at the 9 o'clock hour, reviewing the preliminary budget as an informational item, including the LCAP. The proposed budget will be coming in about 2 weeks to meet the statutory requirement of June 30th approval, recommendation, and approval by the Board of Trustees. Now I'll hand it over to the Director of Fiscal Services, Mr. Eddie Ramos.
Good evening, Board President Anguiano, Board Clerk Troutman, esteemed Board of Trustees, Superintendent Davis, district staff, and Banning community. So let's go ahead and take a look at the budget year 22-23 estimated actuals. At this time, in preparation of the annual budget, we take a look back at the 22-23 year, and we take a look to see what happened and what didn't happen. Now, on this slide, we have a breakdown of the savings of positions that may have been vacant for a full year or a partial year or maybe half of the year. So what we did was we accounted for all of that savings and we provided a breakdown by Banning Teachers Association, CSEA, Management Confidential, non-represented. So total savings for the 22-23 year total 3.3 million, and the FTEs equate to about 31 FTEs. Now, down at the bottom shows it includes partial year vacancies, full year vacancies. Included in those total savings is health and welfare and also fringe benefits. Let's take a look at the enrollment projections. You'll notice the historical trend on the right-hand side. That's our historical information that's already occurred. Now, moving towards the middle, we can see the 22-23 year, and moving on into the 23-24 fiscal year. The Banning Unified projected enrollment is relatively flat. Now, you'll notice that we do have an increase from 22-23 to 23-24, an increase of 58 students, but that is due to a larger 12th grade class graduating and a smaller 12th grade graduating, a larger 11th grade coming in. Now, for the 23-24 budget, on the left-hand side, we have a summary of all of our revenues. We have four main sources: the local control funding formula, federal sources, state, and local. Total revenues for the budget 23-24 year come out to 87 million. Now, on the right-hand side, we have a breakdown of all of our expenditures. At the top, we have certificated salaries, classified salaries, benefits, books and supplies, services. Our expenditures total 84 million. And so when you take our total revenues of 87 million minus the expenditures of 84 million, that gives us a net difference in the positive. So that means that our revenues are outpacing the expenditures. Now, it's important to note that carryover balances are not included, as well as the Banning Teachers Association tentative agreement with the district that is not included. However, that will be included in the budget presented later on this month. Now, within those expenditures, we have 5.9 million in one-time funds. So we're accounting for all those expenditures and anticipating on spending down those one-time funds. Now drilling down on those one-time funds, here's a summary of all of the different programs that we've received one-time funding for, and the funding is restricted based on the specific program requirements. The amount is significant, so our total additional restricted funding is 5.9 million. Now, being that these funds have expiration dates and they are restricted, these are the funds that we're looking to spend down first, because we want to meet those deadlines as well as use it based on those restrictions. So to take a look at the multi-year assumptions and projections, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Herrera.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramos. And to highlight one of his comments here from the previous slides, as we're looking at the restricted one-time dollars, the rule of thumb in school finance is to use the most restrictive dollar first. And so this is, again, just a demonstration as to how the fiscal landscape in education has changed significantly as a result of the pandemic, and how the district is leveraging these resources and to ensure that we're providing these services for students as required. In the multi-year assumptions, I will be going through a few figures worthy of mentioning. First and foremost, as Mr. Ramos did explain, the enrollment phenomena that we're experiencing, not necessarily growth, not necessarily decreases, just overall the shifting of larger grade levels, smaller grade levels as they graduate. The one figure here that is really impacting total revenues for the 3 years is the lower than historical average of 90% for average daily attendance, which is a frequency in which students attend school. A little bit different from the enrollment. It's body count of what we're expecting versus what the reality is of those students attending school. Historically, we've been at a 93.2%. And over 3 years, this is an overall reduction in LCFF revenues of $5.2 million, of which 1.5 million are strictly for supplemental and concentration. And I repeat, $5.2 million as a result of the lower average daily attendance, which is not just a banning isolated issue here, a challenge. This is a challenge that is statewide and overall decreases average between 9 to 12% for unified school districts. Also, there's been changes in the demographics in terms of the unduplicated pupil counts, which are reflected by the socioeconomically disadvantaged population, English learners, and homeless and foster youth. Historically, or excuse me, rather in the last year, we were reporting 93% and currently at a lower percentage, which averages out over 3 years to about 91, 90.8, and 90.5%. Again, that is the equivalent of $1.5 million in reduced funding for supplemental and concentration, which is again the meat, if you will, of the LCAP. The cost of living adjustment, we've been living through economies where there is hyperinflation. And so we see this in 23-24 at 8.22%, the cost of living adjustment. However, there are significant decreases moving forward into what's considered normalized cost of living adjustments. Moving on to the pension employer contributions, which is the cost of the district in order to support staffing salaries. It is a pretty flat here based on the latest information for CalSTRS, which is the pension plan for certificated staff. However, for classified staff, historically, we've seen significant increases. And again, the latest projections do indicate that there'll be an increase from 26.68% in the current upcoming year up to 28.30% in the third out year. And last but not least, it's always good to mention and also reflect in the budget projections that there is a consumer price index that is applied to which is known as the cost of doing business, meaning that there's an expectation due to inflation that there would be an increase in material supplies and services at about 3%, all the way down to 2.6%. So we do see some of the projections that are provided by various agencies that things will normalize. And I say things loosely, but it does include the economy and overall expectations of overall state revenues. Looking strictly now at the combined unrestricted and restricted general fund balances and reserves for the multi-year projections, I will go directly to the net X's and deficits that are projected. Currently, the figures here, again, are combined. The slide earlier on one-time funding, most resources do recognize expenditures. However, revenues were recognized in the previous year, which gives the effect of a deficit here, as we see in 24-25 at $2.8 million and 25-26 at a little bit over $3 million. However, the majority of this is in the restricted portion of the general fund. On the unrestricted general fund, for the 23-24 school year, there is a net surplus of $1.6 million. In the second year out, there is a small deficit of $29,000. And in the third out year, it is a deficit of about $600,000. And so as we're going through the process of refining the LCAP, as we're going through the process of refining unrestricted general fund expenditures, there's opportunities to go ahead and adjust those projections and be able to have a balanced budget. Again, as Mr. Ramos mentioned, current projections do not include any tentative agreements with our labor partners, Band and Teachers Association, and those figures will be embedded into the proposed budget later this month. Digging even deeper into what is known as the multi-year projection reserves transparency is to identify some of the components of the fund balance, and then in a subsequent slide, go through those line items here. And worthy of mentioning is the Reserve for Economic Uncertainties. The board has approved in previous years a Reserve for Economic Uncertainties, also known as a REU, of 4.5%. The state requirement is 3%, therefore there's an increase of 1.5 in order to help mitigate any type of economic uncertainties, just as it is in the name. And here we see a 3.8 up to $3.9 million. And let me see if I can this. There it is, 3.8 to $3.9 million reserves requirement. Also, if we go to the bottom portion here in that dark green for reserve, projected reserve for economic uncertainties, we see that we are meeting that 4.5% from 6.5 all the way down to 4.7. Again, mentioned earlier, there were some deficits that were budgeted that we're working through the process of balancing out. Changes in law for the prior fiscal year and also
Mr.
upholding. Yes.
Herrera, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is there a reason why the copy we have has different figures than the one on the presentation?
Yes, so the copy was printed at an earlier date, and as we went through the revisions, the information that's provided here on the slides is the most up-to-date information. So I do apologize. I should have mentioned that earlier. Thank you for asking.
Mr. Herrera, is it possible to get an updated copy of that, just those 2 pages?
Absolutely. We'll make sure to get this information to you. And the only revisions, if I understand the timing of the print versus the presentation here, is on this particular slide, which is slide number 10. So I'll ensure the board has the most up-to-date information as it is in the budget document and the presentations as well. 25. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes. 2929. Thank you. Just to repeat, that's number 29, correct? Sold. And as I was mentioning, the changes in law in terms of having a maximum reserve of 10%, that includes the Reserve for Economic Uncertainties and also the assignments. So when we add those 2 figures together, we do see the reserve cap here, or what's known as the fund balance subject to the reserve cap of 7.6% in the first year, all the way down to 5.7% in the third out year. Now, another layer here to the components of the fund balance, and again, all as part of EdCode and also providing full transparency in those components, would like to go ahead and highlight a few figures. First one here, as I mentioned earlier, there was a requirement to contribute additional $309,000 in order to meet the same increase in improved services based on the current year's base funding, and the mechanics of the calculation is a bit involved, so it won't really bore you through that particular arithmetic there. But the district has been prudent in identifying carryovers from 2021 when it was not required to have this carryover in anticipation that there would be changes to the way that increase in improved services are required to be reported. So what this means here is that there's been a commitment of about $1.2 million now reserved to $900,000 that allows us to meet that requirement, meaning that it's not impacting any other area of the unrestricted general fund, because through the foresight here of ensuring that we're meeting that same level of commitment to the LCAP supplemental concentration, which also is equivalent of saying increase in approved services, we do have that reserve, if you will, to ensure that we continue meeting that obligation. Another large ticket item here, as we have recommended to the board, and thank you for approving the commitments resolutions here, is a line item known as unforeseeable mitigating operating factors. There's a lot of factors that impact revenues, as we talked earlier, average daily attendance, you talk about cost of living adjustment, and various other factors. So this particular line item was to help with that, and we do see decreasing from $2.4 million down to $1 million, then $750,000 in the third out year. And that's a way to balance out the budget in terms of meeting the operational needs. Last but not least, we do have a line item here for pending labor relations and the estimated amount of about $7 million. Next steps in terms of the LCAP, and I'll go ahead and venture here to speak on behalf of the academics team, is to then go through what is known as a fast pass process with the Riverside County Office of Education, RCOE. At that point, they'll be making recommendations. We'll be making adjustments and refinement. Additional input is still welcomed, meaning that this is, again, a preliminary informational item. The recommendation for approval will be on June 28th, and the lcap@banning.k12.ca.us email address is still available to, again, solicit that input and feedback on the preliminary LCAP that has been presented today. On the budget side, the tentative agreement cost will be added. Also, we'll be making some adjustments as we're continuing to work with RCOE through the fast pass process. And last but not least, we will be making a recommendation for adoption on June 28th, 2023. I would like to thank the Board of Trustees for your time and support. Also, I want to take a quick second here to thank Mr. Eddie Ramos and his team in fiscal services. It does take a lot of folks here to put these documents, this information together, and particularly Supervisor Harry Shook and also Tech 3 Anna Orozco that work tirelessly to ensure that we're providing the most accurate information and continuing through what is known as an ongoing evolution of the budget process. With that, are there any questions?
I do have a question. Is it possible to, when we review this, to ask you questions? Because I know that one of the concerns at the state level is whether the 8.22 is going to be actually viable and if those funds are going to be here. So are we going to be discussing that? Or are we going to be addressing that issue as we go along?
That is correct. So if I go back to the January proposed budget, at that point, the governor had proposed not funding the entire statutory COLA. And so there was about a little bit of a, let's say, 8.13% at that point. However, his proposed budget in May did make a recommendation to fully fund the statutory COLA at 8.22%. And as of about 2 days ago, the legislative budget committees did come into agreement in supporting that moving forward. And so at this point, it's now on the governor to move forward with finalizing the budget as of July 1st. So at this point, all is pointing towards fully funding at 8.22% COLA.
Okay, I was just listening this morning about economists here that are actually thinking it's going to be a lot lower. So I guess, do we have some kind of a contingency if it is lower than that? Even
The
if
contingencies are currently worked into the budget commitments and those various items for other mitigating factors. We're also anticipating those labor relations agreements as well. And so in the case that there's any changes, and we see this often in mid-year, either in favor or against the district, at some points, even the unions do reach out and say, we demand to bargain, whatever changes may be impactful to the budget overall. So in this case, if there is a significant change in the cost of living adjustment, then the district may engage with our labor partners to then discuss how to address those concerns.
Okay, but none of that stuff is going to be affected by one-time funds. I mean, anything that we have that's ongoing is not going to be taken out of the one-time funds that we have right now, right?
Generally speaking, ongoing costs are not supported by one-time funding. Therefore, to answer your question, if I stood correctly, we will not be funding any ongoing costs with one-time dollars, correct?
Okay, thank you.
I have some questions on the language part of the LCAP and some of the things that it's saying that we're going to be implementing or doing. I'm not sure who I addressed that to.
Question?
My first question is it possible to adjust the desired outcomes, or once that is set, are those set?
We are currently in the process of adjusting those outcomes. We will have to keep what we wrote prior, but in parentheses, putting the new outcomes as outlined.
Okay, because I noticed for part of it, we were expecting 0 students to fall below, and that's just a little unobtainable and unrealistic.
Yes, and so part of that is continually looking at our data and our progress and making realistic goals and benchmarks.
Another one was graduation rates. The predicted outcome was lower than our actual graduation rates have been for some of our subgroups. I was just curious about that. Off the wall questions. Some of the language in there, I just was kind of questioning. There was language blaming the strike, the teacher strike, for chronic absenteeism.
I think that it might have been written in a way that I could see how it'd be interpreted that way. But the idea was to really bring that year's attendance. It began to drop then, and then we haven't recovered. So the impact has been trifold by the COVID. It's been impacted by distance learning. So it just started to decrease back then. And so that was the only explanation that we were trying to set or frame the data with. So that has been reworded.
Sorry, I have more. There was a statement in there about expulsion rates and showing that we had made positive improvements, but actually when you're comparing it in 19 and 20, it wasn't a complete year. And 2021, there were no students in person. I know we've also done other things to try to alleviate expelling kids, but I'm just cautious about using words that we're making positive or progress towards. And then this year, we're showing higher numbers. So I don't know if that's something that can be adjusted.
We'll take a look at that.
My last one, it says in there something about 5 extra days of pay for instructional coaches, and then it would be discussed in negotiations. But my understanding is that it was not discussed in negotiations.
So, yes, at this point, we wanted to be able to provide our coaches some additional time. Many of them have asked to be able to come back early to work on some things. But we do realize that is something that will need to be negotiated.
So in the interim time, we are paying them overtime to come in.
I have a few questions. Okay, and it's from the PowerPoint regarding the opportunities for community input. How many of these were virtual versus in person? As well as at what point will we resume only in person or a hybrid?
So this year, we actually did a test where we wanted to see if we would get a larger increase of parent participation. Prior to COVID, we were doing everything in person. Then during the closure year and the year after, we had to go virtual. So the following year, what we did is we alternated every month between in-person and virtual just to gauge to see if we had increased participation. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to come back to the numbers we had prior to COVID, to having those rooms filled with DPAC and DLAC as we used to. So we really need to think about what do we need to do to bring our parents back, to make them feel engaged and part of the process. Right now, I'm going to be honest, we have about 2 to 3 participants at each of the meetings.
And then my next question, for goal number 5. Based on the PowerPoint, I'm hearing, or I understood that we're working on that reclassification and the English learners. Do we have a spot or a bullet point for maybe revamping our volunteer program, especially at the elementary level, in regards to, as a volunteer, we usually sit down and read with the students and help them so that the teacher can focus on the other kiddos that need more one-on-one while you have the ones that are reading independently at their desk. And so I believe that could help us if we're able to hone into volunteerism with our parents who are willing to go and help.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you.
So you will consider it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And then my next question is on page 23. I see total savings. I don't understand why it's a good thing if we have vacant positions. When vacant positions mean we don't have enough staff to help our kids.
And that's absolutely correct. And I apologize if the message was possibly delivered in a way that it's a good thing. Absolutely not for students not having the support in terms of staff. It does not help them progress or go ahead and show improvement. In terms of, again, staffing support, I believe the message here was identifying those vacancies as savings as part of the unrestricted general fund in order, in an effort to be fully transparent and be able to have an estimated actual fund balance that is not too far different from when we close the books as of June 30th, which will be reported in September. I think there were some concerns last year because there was the same concern in terms of vacancies, and now it's just a good thing in the sense of reflecting it in the budget in order to have that negotiating ability with the labor partners.
But if we fill those positions, can we afford it?
That is correct. So the mechanism that was implemented is recognizing the savings for the 22-23 fiscal year, reducing the budget, overall ultimately increasing our beginning fund balance in 23-24, expecting those positions to be filled. So in order to answer your question, those positions are affordable in terms of already budgeted in the budget projections for the new year and 2 subsequent years.
Thank you.
I have another question, but it's actually for Dr. Pendleton. Actually, 2 questions, if I could. On goal number 1, A5, you have additional English language development specialist to support elementary sites. I had one question. There are 5 integrated ELD practices that teachers can do. And are we training our staff, our teachers? I'm not talking about special, extra specialists, but really empowering the teachers that we have, giving them the tools. Is this one of the practices that we have here?
So the role of the English language learner specialist is really an ELD coach. It's being once we provide teachers with the additional training that we know that they need, is to be able to extend the coach into the classroom, to be able to provide demo lessons and be able to provide them with support that they need, maybe as an extra eye to give them feedback on something they've implemented, and also to be able to provide additional resources. And we know that those needs are very different in an elementary versus a secondary. Most of our children in elementary school are either newcomers or children who were born in this country knowing only one language. And the secondary students tend to be a majority of newcomers and long-term English learners. So we know that their needs are different. So in order for us to provide that intensive intervention support, the monitoring part, to have somebody in there helping teachers, coaching them through that process is really what we see ideal in order for us to increase our reclassification rates.
Oh, and that's great. Thank you. But I guess my question is that are our teachers learning how to integrate those 5 ELD integrated practices so that it's more student-centered? I mean, is this something that we are doing?
To be honest, it's an area
Specifically.
of us, for us for growth. That's why we thought that this position would be key for us to be able to extend those trainings and practices.
Can I jump in? I thought I read in here somewhere that teachers are being GLAD trained.
Yes,
So is that something that's already happening?
that's upcoming for this year. So we're going to provide the elementary with GLAD training and then be able to support it with our ELD, our EDL specialist or our ELD coach. Absolutely.
Okay, and then, thank you. And then the other question I had is the STEAM on Demand. I know I just want to clarify that. Is that a home-based project online?
No,
No,
they're
okay,
hands-on kits that are
okay,
provided to each of the teachers' classroom where the kids are actually creating experiments
okay.
and doing hands-on experimental learning, creating lava lamps and earthworm jars and so forth, where the kids are actually learning that piece of the science with their hands and creating experiments.
That's great. But are we integrating our standards in that as far as the children being able to have a student centered, embedding that language at that time? Are we doing?
Yes,
Okay, good.
yes, we're following the 5 steps of creating an experiment where the kids are actually learning the language early on so that they can be better prepared as they move up through the upper grades, middle school and high school.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate
Sorry, Dr. Pendleton. One more. So for goal 2, professional development, you had mentioned that some programs were taken out, the ones that were not being utilized. How many would you say were taken out? And would you say there's still a lot that we don't utilize? Or how many would you say?
So we did 2 things in order for us to come to a conclusion of what we needed to do. We provided teachers with a survey about what they were using, what kind of an impact it was having with instruction, and then how well did they feel that they were trained. We took that data and then we took the actual clever data on the back end to see the actual usage. And by using those 2 forms of data, we were able to establish that all the digital platforms that we had originally purchased during our closure time that were great during closure, right? Nearpod, Seesaw, that are coming to mind. All those platforms that teachers no longer were wanting to use or needed to use because they were tired of that digital platform and wanted to go back to the traditional pencil and paper. So I would say about, if I can add it into the board updates.
I would
So I don't want to
appreciate
misspeak right now, but there was a handful.
Okay.
If I may add off of that, what was the saving costs for those programs that we're no longer utilizing?
Again, I would have to collaborate with fiscal and I can add it into the board. We can add it into the board notes at a later date.
And then did we take the ones out just to put us where we need to be, or are there still some that we can take out that we're not utilizing anymore?
So that's the 3rd phase of this, where I went back to the principals and we said, look, these are the platforms that we're considering not renewing with. And the principals who felt like they were platforms that their teachers were still interested in were at the discretion of keeping them at their site through their funding. But district-wide, I don't know, I would have to look.
Thank you.
I'll present that update in the notes.
Appreciate it.
I had one more question. Sorry. On the LCAP, it says that our percentage as far as the students acquiring each of the individual standards and mastering those was 57%. I think that was the one that you had on there, but in actuality, looking at the Smarter Balance, the test for California, there's a lot of it's 25%. So I'm kind of wondering how we can see if that 57% is really accurate or if it's just a teach and test kind of situation, if it's actually working. Are we going to be looking at the comparison between those percentages and the ones that we're having this coming year?
Absolutely. Data is our name. We have to keep a pulse on the data to have a better understanding if what we're doing is having any kind of impact. And to what degree are we impacting the instruction? So absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Are there any other comments? No? Okay. Are there any additional public comments? Okay, hearing no comments, I declare that the public hearing is now closed. The time is 8:52 p.m. Item 6.2, Educational Services, Discipline Presentation. At this time, I invite Dr. Kazi Bush for the discipline presentation.
Good evening again. I would like to invite Dr. Wolfert, who is going to be discussing a little bit this evening about some of the criteria for our suspensions and expulsions, as well as some of the other means of correction that we employ, some of the criteria that is used, and also some of the programs we have to address some of our disciplinary problems or concerns, and some data to look at. Dr. Wolfert.
Good evening, President Anguiano, Board Clerk Troutman, esteemed members of the board, Superintendent Davis, staff, and community. So when we look at suspensions and expulsions for this year and in general, we look at the fact that there are basically three types of suspensions that occur on the school site. One is a teacher imposed suspension. It can occur for about up to 2 days on any of the education codes in the 48900. As long as we ask a parent to notify them by attending in a meeting, and we can assign work during that time for that student to complete during a teacher imposed suspension. The next type of suspensions are imposed by a school administrator or their the designee of the superintendent, which is an on-campus or out-of-school suspension. Those suspensions can be up to 5 days at a time. And they also are part of Ed Code 48900, except school administrators cannot suspend for K, which is defiance and disruption off campus. Only a teacher can suspend for K alone, and that would have to be an on-campus suspension. And we need to notify the parent in person by email, phone, and we need to provide a request of homework upon the student. And for an out-of-school suspension, we need to give them a written suspension, and we need to be in person or an email or by phone letting the parent know. And if the student is suspended for more than 2 days, we can go ahead and the student or parent can request work to be able to keep up with their studies. When we're looking at suspension by school so far for this school year, this is our 22-23 data from our information system. We're looking that Nicollet Middle School had approximately 311 suspensions. Banning High School had 281 suspensions. Central had 102, Hoffer 53, Cabazon 40, Hammerlane 23, New Horizons 12, and of course, Florida Street had none because they're little. And if we look at grade levels, we can look at how the data kind of flows from kindergarten to 12th grade. We see a spike in suspensions in 6th grade, and then we see a spike in 9th grade. We see a rise for the suspensions per grade level. And then our year to year suspension comparison by month. So from last year to this year, we saw a spike in October last year, but we actually saw a decrease this year. And we saw more suspensions at the beginning of the year this year than we did last year. And then we saw a huge spike in suspensions in the spring of February, March, and then May. And when we're looking at Ed Code, we're looking at the violations in which we can suspend students. So when we're looking at what we call an A1, we had 347 students who caused, attempted to cause, or threatened to cause physical injury to another student. 88 at the high school, 156 at middle school, and 103 at elementary school. And that doesn't mean a fight occurred. They can threaten a fight to be able to violate that Ed Code. C is possessing, used, sold, or otherwise furnished or been under the influence of a controlled substance, alcoholic beverage, or an intoxicant of any kind. We did not have any violations in elementary school. We had 48 in middle school and high school, 54, for a total of 102 for the year. There is a rise in vape pen usage across the state of California. And there's also a rise in marijuana on California school campuses. The next one is K, and that's disrupting school activities or otherwise willfully defy the valid authority of school personnel. And across the district, we saw 74 of those being used by itself. And then A2, that is also a physical aggression Ed Code, willfully using force or violence upon the person except in self-defense. And we had 34 at the high school and 1 at the middle school and 19 at elementary for a total of 54. And usually A2 is much more violent than A1. And then H, which is possessed or used tobacco products on our campuses. And we had 35 across the district.
Dr. Wolford, if I may ask, regarding the elementary schools, are we able to get a breakdown of what the numbers are across the 3 elementary schools for like this table?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then when we look at the criteria to suspend, we can only suspend for an Ed Code violation. If it's not in the 48,900 statute, then we can't suspend for it. And teachers can suspend for what administrators can suspend for in their classroom, except they have the additional suspension of K that an administrator cannot suspend for. So what we're looking at is, so we suspend for Ed Code, and then we have to find out, do we have jurisdiction? Did it occur on campus or did it occur at a school activity? And on some of the violations, we need to look at other means of correction. Were they implemented And was it feasible to implement those before we impose that suspension? And was an informal conference held with the student? Did the student get notified for the reason of suspension? Did we try other means of correction other than a suspension? And did we have evidence that the student did this? So if we can meet all these criteria, then we can move forward with a suspension. And when you're looking at 48,900 A through E, you can suspend on a first offense if the student's presence causes a danger to other persons, if they continue to be a danger on campus. So basically, this is where the big switch in ed code has occurred. So that's called other means of correction. And then this happens in two ways. We look at non-exclusionary practices and along consequences along with interventions to ensure that student can stay in their learning environment while still learning from doing something they shouldn't do at school by violating ed code. So the legislature is really looking at trying to keep kids in school. So then we do other means of correction. But sometimes other means of correction are not feasible. And sometimes the administrator needs to create safety on campus. And in those two instances, they may, for a violent offense, A through E, suspend off campus for a first offense. If it's a nonviolent offense, then they cannot suspend off campus for a first offense, and you cannot suspend off campus for a first offense of C. You have to provide an intervention, which is drug use. And so some of these interventions that we're providing here in Banning are, we have a strong restorative practice curriculum. We have teachers who are trained in circles. And we have teachers that will be trainer of trainers to have ongoing training through and counselors for ongoing training throughout the school year. So we can use these practices in the day-to-day classroom. We have alternative to suspension, which leads students through a restorative practice questions and the process to have them look at their behavior, come up with replacement behaviors, try to mitigate the harm and understand the harm they may have created to make better choices and to move forward. And we also will have an alternative learning center, which will be an alternative to expulsion for students who do not commit a mandatory recommendation for expulsion. And it'll be a flexible, independent study model, and we'll have embedded counseling and restorative practices that we work with the students on a weekly to daily basis. And so when we look at our criteria to suspend, then there's the criteria to expel. And it's similar to the criteria to suspend because we look at the ed code, which is the 48,900 and 48,915. We look at the jurisdiction over the misconduct. Same thing, it's got to occur at school or connected to school or on the way to and from school before the student gets home. And is there a secondary finding? And that means, are there circumstances that mean we have to move towards expulsion, such as a mandatory recommendation? And is there substantial evidence to support this expulsion? Can the school prove that the student did do this offense? Did we have jurisdiction over it? And is there that secondary finding, meaning that the student is a continuing danger on campus, other means of correction have failed, or it's a mandatory recommendation? And when we're looking at our secondary findings, we're looking at Ed Code 48,915 B1 or E1, and that's that other means of correction are not feasible or have repeatedly failed to bring about that proper conduct. Means we've tried intervention after intervention after intervention, and the student still keeps getting into fights. And we know that they're going to continue getting into fights because they keep doing it. That's other means of correction failing. And then the next thing that happens is we can say, due to the nature of the violation, the student is a danger on campus. So then we can expel because they're a continuing danger. So it's either other means of correction have failed, or they're a continuing danger, or both of those together. And then the mandatories: possessing, selling a firearm. You have a firearm on our campus, you have to you have to go up for expulsion. You brandished a knife at another person, you have to go up for expulsion. You sell controlled substances on campus. You commit or attempt to commit sexual assault or battery, and you possess an explosive. And these 5 ed codes of 40, they're 48915C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They automatically meet the criteria of 48915B2, which means if the student's doing these things, they are a danger on campus. And so we're looking at some other notable provisions. I said before, now an administrator can do an out-of-school suspension on K after the first offense for grades 9 through 12. But we know that's probably going away. And then foster youth have an ED's right holder or attorney, and they need to be notified just like a parent if the student's going to be suspended, excuse me. And then law enforcement, we need to report threats or perceived threats to law enforcement. And we need to allow for a school site search under reasonable suspicion when we're, having a suspicion of a gun on campus or drugs or something like that. We need to call law enforcement and allow them to do their job. Is there any questions?
I have a clarifying question. Did you say that this is new ed code, that they can't be suspended for the first time of fighting?
So fighting, you may suspend on first offense if other means of correction have failed or the student poses a danger on campus. Usually if they get into pretty violent fight, we can prove that they're a danger on campus and we can suspend. We usually will look at ATS and have the student off campus in ATS, go through the process and then come back. And then the second fight, the administrator may go for a suspension on the second fight. But depending on the fight and if it was A1 or A2, if the student is a danger on campus, that may result in a suspension on first offense.
So I'm just trying to understand in my head, so please bear with me.
Okay, no.
So if it's the first time they're getting in a fight, how would you prove that other means of intervention failed?
Well, you can't prove that portion. It's the second portion that they're not safe on campus. And some of the fights will trigger secondary fights, and it might trigger the student not being safe because another student may want to retaliate because they get pretty, they get invested into these group fights that might happen. So what you're looking at is sometimes we will go straight to suspension on the first offense because we can't keep them on campus. We need for them to cool down. We need the other person to cool down. It was mutual combat. They both get suspended. And then we need to go ahead and when they come back, do the interventions, the restorative conference, all of that, and get them the counseling they need. Because every time we give a consequence, we need to pair that with an intervention. If I give you detention, I give you detention, and then I talk with you and I counsel you. If I suspend you, I'm suspending you, but now I'm counseling you. I might be giving you anger management, and I might be having you go to counseling. So every time we give a consequence, we need to give a corresponding intervention. That doesn't mean we just give the intervention, we give a consequence and the intervention. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Item 7.1, Educational Services, International Society for Technology and Education 2023 Conference.
This item is for the board to approve staff attendance to the 2023 International Society for Technology Conference, June 24 through 29, 2023 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Is there a motion and a second to open and discuss item 7.1?
I move. I second.
Any discussion or question? No? I have a motion from Ms. Troutman and a second from Ms. Ruiz to approve item 7.1. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Item 8.1, Business Services, Window Tintin.
This item is for the board to approve the agreement with Window Film Depot.
Is there a motion and a second to open and discuss item 8.1?
I move to open and discuss.
A second.
Any questions or discussions? I have one question. What site are we starting off or what building, just to be specific and clear?
Good evening. The first phase is scheduled to take place at Banning High School,
Mhm.
with subsequent phases to follow to address the other sites.
Is there a specific area or just in general?
It's the entire campus.
Just- You're just
So
gonna
the
start?
scope
Okay.
of work is to install tinted security film, so shatter-resistant film on the exterior windows that face offices and classrooms. And then on the interior, areas within the buildings at the high school, to install a combination of shatter-resistant and one-way tint on office spaces and classrooms.
What's the time frame for completion?
So it's tentative currently. The estimated start to the project is early July.
And then end?
It should be done over the course of a week.
Oh, just 1 week? And then how do you determine which site is next to follow based on the other school sites?
It's a good question. So we've had this discussion in depth on several occasions at the district safety committee meetings. And really, what we've identified as the greatest need is the exterior portions of all of our schools. So areas of campuses that face the street, face the surrounding communities. And so the idea in the subsequent phases is to essentially work from the outside in making sure that we're securing the perimeters of the schools with that security tent and then addressing the internal needs. So the hope is that we can address multiple sites at once in the subsequent phases.
If I may ask, could we try to do it as quickly as possible, specifically at Hoffer, especially with the incident that occurred next to the park?
Absolutely, and that was definitely a main point of the discussion when we brought this project up in general in that safety committee. Absolutely. Offer Central was another school that was specifically mentioned just because of the large bank of windows that faces the street at that particular site.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I have a motion from Ms. Ruiz and a second from Ms. Novales to approve item 8.1. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Item 8.2, Business Services Contractual Agreements.
This item is for the board to approve and or ratify contractual agreements as provided.
Is there a motion and a second to open and discuss item 8.2?
I motion to open.
I second.
Any discussion or questions? Okay, I have a motion from Ms. Novales and a second from Ms. Troutman to approve item 8.2. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Item 8.3, Business Services Monthly Fiscal Services Report.
This item is for the board to approve monthly fiscal services reports, bank reconciliations, purchase orders, warrant summary, and commercial warrant registers.
Is there a motion and a second to open and discuss item 8.3?
I move.
A second.
Any discussion or questions? Okay, I have a motion for Ms. Troutman and a second for Ms. Novales to approve item 8.3. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. Item 9.1, Safety Committee updates. Mr. Shildroth, will you please share the latest update?
Hi, good evening. So I just want to take a moment. We have a broad range of safety projects and initiatives that are ongoing right now in the district. And so I really just wanted to give you a glimpse at some of the upcoming projects and initiatives that we have. So one of these that we've discussed on multiple occasions now, both here at prior board meetings and amongst the district safety committee, is the security camera project. So phase 1 was approved by the board last time we met. That phase 1 project, the anticipated start date is early July, and that's focusing specifically on Nicollet Middle School. And just as a reminder, that is a comprehensive overhaul of the security cameras that we have at the site. So upgrade in resolution, but also adding additional safety and security features that allow us to be more proactive in the way we approach safety and security at the school sites. We are looking, and we actually have a quote that we've received for a second phase of the project. Second phase of the project, we're looking to address Coombs and Banning High School campus. Again, just like with Nicollet, comprehensive overhaul of the systems that we have in place there. Scope of work and quote is currently being refined to make sure that we're doing everything we can to best address the needs of the sites. We have plans for phase 3 to address the elementary schools as well. And again, making sure that we're addressing the current needs, addressing any sort of blind spots or issues that the elementary schools currently have. And we're hopeful too with that third phase of the camera project that it can go a little bit faster. The elementary schools are smaller, smaller footprints will hopefully allow us to work through that phase faster than the secondary sites. Again, as we just discussed too, the security window film projects are ongoing. So again, phase 1 projected to begin in early July with the high school, and that's all buildings and classroom and office facing windows. We are looking at additional phases on that as well. Phase 2 is to be determined, but like I mentioned previously, the opinion currently is to try to address multiple sites at once with that second phase, and again, work from the outside in, making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect those schools and the staff and students in them.
Mr. Sherwood, if I may, do you mind providing the board an update on the shelter shutters as it relates to the window tinting?
Absolutely. That was the next item on the update. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So shelter shutters, this has been an ongoing discussion with the school board here as well. So we actually just wrapped up phase 3 of that project. So the shelter shutter lockdown window covers are meant to help staff members take away direct line of sight to their classrooms and offices. Those are the smaller windows that you see in the doorways around the district. So we did, within the last few weeks, receive and install additional covers for Nicollet Middle School, Banning High School, Hoffer, Coombs, and Central Elementary. There's one additional shipment scheduled to arrive tomorrow to meet all of the other areas throughout the district that were not covered due to a misship. So as far as the status goes on the shelter shutter project, we're looking at completion and full coverage at all sites. Realistically, that will be done before the end of the month. So we should have full coverage on that product. Also discussed, and this is a big one for us here in the district, is the ongoing Hour Zero School Emergency Program project. So again, that's comprehensive school safety plans, guidelines. It's helping us with every single component of safety and security initiatives at the site. We are making some ground on that. So we have plan orientation for district and site administration and their support staff scheduled for August 1st. So that is really where the project gets started in earnest. That's the initial training to make sure everybody who is in charge of running a site is trained. And then the plan following will include training and support staff for all of the general staff at each of the sites. Beyond that, and again, I know this was a major concern throughout the community and district, was plans that we had in place to address active shooter training and protocols. So we adopted the ALICE standards after discussions between the members of the district safety committee. And we do have some movement on that as well. So we're actually currently finalizing the first component of that training for all of our staff. This is online training that is tentatively set for the beginning of August. The first week our certificated employees are going to return. It's part of the safety training trainings that we're bringing that first week of school as they return. And then hands-on training would be followed. Have to have the virtual online learning before we can proceed to hands-on training. Beyond that, and really a lot of what we've talked about right now is the physical security and safety of the sites. There's obviously safety concerns beyond that, right? Beyond the physical components. So what we are doing, again, this was a main topic of conversation last we met, we're really making sure that we're being proactive with our online safety solutions. So that would include things like online monitoring of student devices, our web filtering to limit what our students have access to, and to also report suspicious or dangerous activities and searches. It's also including a 24/7, 365-day-a-year safety tip line. That's another big initiative that we have going forward here. And so what we've been doing over the course of the last 4 weeks now, since that safety committee last met, is we've been meeting with companies and seeing what they offer so we can best address the needs of our students and staff here in the district. Beyond that, last thing here that we talked about here that I'm going to share is talked about the need to create a safety task force here in the district made up of our classified employees is what we're hoping. And really what we're trying to do with the formation of that safety task force is doing a comprehensive audit of our site radios, which are essential in emergency communications, doing a thorough audit of our emergency supplies, and also doing a thorough audit of our door locks to make sure that we're doing everything we can to lock doors internally throughout our district. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. I do have one question, and this is about Nicolette, about the entrance to Nicolette.
Yes.
Do any of these safety protocols address Nicolette's clear sight into, for an active shooter? I was very concerned when I walked up there and I was just wondering what progress was made.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's multiple ways we're looking to address that, right? So we have a broad range of buildings in our district, various ages, Nicolette being one of the older sites, obviously, that we have here, not necessarily constructed with safety in mind at the time. So my answer is twofold, really. So one, as far as specific training and protocols related to Nicolette. So the ALICE active shooter response training takes place at our sites when we get to the hands-on portion. So the idea here is that Nicolette's staff, both classified and certificated, will be training on how to respond to an active shooter incident in their own spaces.
I'm just actually asking about the door, the clear sight from the door, the glass door. What are we doing to protect personnel and our students?
Okay, so on the doors, and this is every single glass door that we have throughout the district. That goes back to the security window film projects that we have that are ongoing. The plan that we have that's being implemented at high school and that will carry over to the other sites as well is basically double-sided security film on the doors. So that's to take away the ability of a potential shooter to enter that doorway by shooting out the window and gaining entrance. So it's meant to hold that window together. Also, all exterior glass that we're looking to address with that project is tinted. So the idea is to take away direct line of sight on those sites as well.
When is the next safety committee meeting? I don't know if we haven't scheduled that yet or if. 'Cause sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It has not been scheduled yet. So that's an arrangement that we have to make since it's made up of members of all of our parties here throughout the district and with many of our classified staff leaving and certificated staff off for the year as well. We want to make sure that we're setting a date where everybody can participate and we're getting equal representation from all the parties.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to add something. I asked Mr. Shilworth to talk about it. And I know why you're not talking about it, but it goes back to the weight of safety and security as being a top priority for not just our students and our staff, but in our country and in our space. As we cannot per se control everything that happens, but we can create an awareness and create safety protocols. And so I know it's a high level of stress and oversight. And just as evidenced by 2 weeks ago, we had an incident and there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen. This happened right out in front in our space. And that night, in the course of, I want to say 12 hours, but it was less than 12 hours. We went from having 8 law enforcement officers to over 24 armed law enforcement officers with security checks to enter our stadium. And so I say that because the magnitude of that is huge. And that did not happen alone. That happened with Mr. Shilworth, working with our MOT staff, our facility staff, our business staff, and our security teams. They had a debriefing that afternoon. There was a lot of things going on and it happened really quickly. That stuff doesn't happen. That's magic. And it's magic because of the commitment that we have and the urgency that is taking place in our community. So I know, Mr. Shilworth, you don't, I know kind of how you roll, but I just want to thank you for taking the words that I use is the ownership and urgency of that. And yes, you are not doing that alone. You're doing that with a whole host of people. But when we as people who have responsibility take ownership in the urgency, anything can happen. And I know that our staff and our community felt safe that June 1st with our graduation by the work of so many people. So thank you.
If I could say one more thing. I completely agree with what you said, Mr. Davis. Thank you for your commitment to this specific job. You know, it's the safety of our staff, our kids, you know, everybody on these campuses. And with that said, I hope we can continue to make staff and students feel safe on campus, you know, after that incident, you know, gates are locked, doors are locked where they need to be and things like that. You know, I would not feel comfortable if I were working on campus knowing something that had happened and then all the gates were left open or anything like that. So I would like to continue the vigilance, you know, that we have been doing, especially after this incident. I would hope we're a little more vigilant about instances like that. And I really hope everyone will continue to feel safe because I know nobody wants to go to work scared. I know I don't. So, and I know you're working diligently to achieve that. And I'm extremely grateful to you for that. Thank you.
Appreciate it. If I could just take a moment just to expand on what Superintendent Davis was mentioning too. I really want everyone to understand how our staff, particularly our security staff, and our local community responded. Like you said, less than 12 hours. It was immediate. It was as soon, the process started as soon as the tragedy started unfolding. And just to give you some additional context, we more than quadrupled our normal security presence at the high school graduation. We had upwards of 25 security guards. We had upwards of 25 law enforcement officers from 3 different
local agencies. So the Banning Police Department came through, Beaumont Police Department offered their services as well, and Riverside County Sheriff's Department came out in force as well. We also changed the policies and procedures. So I know any last minute changes like that, such a large event can sometimes cause issues, but honestly, given the circumstances, I thought it was pretty seamless. And I think going forward, we learned a lot in a positive way, and the policies and procedures that we implemented after the incident, I think going to become standard practice for us moving forward. And we're just going to continue to get better as we go forward. So thank you.
I was very happy to hear that, you know, that there were changes made to increase security, because I know I felt safe at the high school graduation. And seeing all the police, all security surrounded, you know, throughout the campus, it was excellent, you know, because, you know, they're going to do what they need to do to keep us safe. And then seeing all the, I saw the notification when it came out about searches, you know, that they can search people and their belongings. I thought that was great because it's just in case. And you can't, in my opinion, you can't put a price on safety. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Item 9.2, governance training updates.
There's just a few things to add. The Board of Trustees and the governance team is working on Brown Act training that will occur towards the end of July. And the other training that we're looking into is doing some workshops on effective governance, specifically pertaining to the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Trustees, superintendent, as well as positive governance team culture. So the norms, and we're doing that collectively as a district as well. So the board is doing that as well. And then finally, looking at our protocols, structures and processes and how to refine those things, because the goal of the Board of Trustees is to be the best that they can to provide the best support for our community. So I want to thank the board for their commitment. They're doing a lot of things behind the scene, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but they're committed to doing the work to get better. So those are just a few things.
And Mr. Davis, I also want to add to that, that we are committed to developing a board calendar. We're not quite sure where that one is right now, but we're committed to doing that. We also are looking at a board self-evaluation. And everyone is being evaluated and held accountable. So we want you to know that we are also looking into a board self-evaluation in this process.
Great, thank you. Item 10, board member comments. Who would like to go first?
I would like to say that after attending the Masters in Governance over the last 6 weeks, I would like to share some of the takeaways that I feel would benefit our district. We've had a lot of responsibilities, and you know, we want a clear direction based on our mission and our vision when we go forward with the LCAP process. And because this represents our achievements for our students. So in keeping with all of those things, and in keeping with some of the issues that we faced this year, I would like to add a board item in the future. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Then I guess I don't have any other things to say right now. Sorry.
I just want to start by thanking all teachers and staff for another great, successful year. It was a little bittersweet for me. You guys know my daughter just graduated, and I had the pleasure of going to the graduation. I also attended Nicolette's graduation. Nothing better, in my opinion, than celebrating the successes of our students. But I want to make sure that our staff knows that they have ownership in those successes as well. And I want to thank all of you for your dedication and staying here so late with us. So thank you.
I want to echo Ms. Ruiz and say thank you to everyone that worked really hard during the academic school year. I also want to say great shout out, big shout out, and thank you to all of you who are still working through the summer. Everyone has lives and everybody wants to get a little rest in there, but I drive by our district all the time because my sister lives on 3rd Street and I see the parking lot full. And I just think, dang, there's my people working really hard for my district. So I just want everyone to know that we see you and we see your hard work and we totally appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. And your hard work is showing, not only through our student success, but our community is talking and they're talking very positive. Everyone has something really good to say about our success and how our district is moving forward, because we all know that we had a hot mess on our hands and little by little, we are getting to it and working very hard to fix it all for these kiddos. I want to say thank you to everyone that gave donations to our district and to our students. And I wanted to say thank you to Ms. Cole, Ms. Burgess, Ms. Rodriguez, and Mr. Valdivia for having me at the promotions for the students and the graduations. It was a lot of fun to be up on stage for Central, shake their hand, hear all their successes. And just like Ms. Ruiz, I had a nephew promoting from Central over to Nicollet Middle School. So it was an amazing feeling to bear hug him up there and say congratulations to my kiddo who has had his struggles in school, but he made it. Other than that, thank you for hanging in there. It's late and I know everyone's worked. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'll go next. And to echo Ms. Martinez Lara, I would also like to say thank you for staff for a successful school year. It's wonderful seeing all the students, their promotions, the graduations. And I want to say thank you to all staff that are working this summer for the kids to help them succeed and move on. And it's a very good thing you do. You know, you're helping our future and I'm extremely grateful to you for that. And I would also like to say congratulations again to Mr. Paz for his new appointment.
I summarized everything that the ladies have shared. It was great to participate in the promotions and the graduations, to see our students move forward. And I think it always amazes me to see the amount of support that they have, not only from our community, their families, but our staff. So definitely a great way to end the school year. I also appreciate everyone. Just know that you are appreciated, you are valued, and you make a difference in our students' life and in our district. And as always, I'm here if you guys have questions or concerns. I'm happy to ask those questions and try to find a solution, because it's all of our jobs to help our kids move forward. And thank you. All right, item 11, future board items. Go ahead, Leslie.
Well, premature. One of the things that I would like to introduce is based on the issues that we've had. I mean, moving forward, we've talked about having a very positive personnel and, and everybody working together. And one of the things that I learned in the MIG classes was one thing that was suggested, and I think it's a really good idea, and a lot of good districts that are moving forward in a positive way are doing this, regardless of whether they've had issues or not, is and I've spoken with Mr. Davis about this, it's not a new thing, is the unbiased audit of the personnel department, because it was recommended by our COE. And a lot of districts utilize this to make sure that our practices, that our job descriptions, that our protocols, to protect our to protect our personnel so we don't have misunderstandings, be set in place. And so I would like to put that as a future on the next board item, if that's possible.
Awesome, thank you. I would also like to request a future board item on our SST processes across all sites. I would like to know what our process is and how we're implementing it and to ensure consistency across the board. Okay, item 13, adjourning the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
I have a motion from Ms. Ruiz and a second from Ms. Novales to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion passes 5-0. This meeting is adjourned at 9:42 PM. Thank you, everyone.